Working as an FBI special agent was my dream job. My whistleblowing was apolitical and in the spirit of upholding my oath. Nonetheless, the FBI cynically elected to close ranks and attack the messenger.
The FBI will crush you. This government will crush you and your family if you try to expose the truth about things that they are doing that are wrong. We are all examples of that.
Joining us now are Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle. Thanks for joining us, fellas.
FBI whistleblowers Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle both join us now. Gentlemen, so glad to have you on the program. Thank you for your testimony.
We need more folks like you, and I'm sure more people are going to be from your background are going to be giving you guys more intel as you're sharing that with the rest of us. We can kind of see that this is becoming normal for them to be held accountable, because I think especially an institution that we pay their salaries, they need to be held accountable.
I think a lot of people do share our beliefs and convictions. I think they just aren't at the point that Steve and I and others have gotten to. They're too afraid.
Thank you so much for being a guest here on PBD Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
How big is that bloody flag that Steve's got? It's a stone wall of his house. Lots of love, guys. Thanks very much for joining us.
Steve Friend, Garrett O'Boyle, thank you for being with us this morning. More importantly, thank you for speaking out. We appreciate it.
You're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast on a Saturday. The weekend is finally here. It's the weekend after Valentine's Day. Hope that you all had great times out with the wife, got some dinner. Make sure you gave her some flowers. Hope you made great decisions there. It's also race weekend here for me in Daytona Beach. So at any given moment, the Thunderbirds might fly overhead as we are coming to you live on Rumble. Rumble.com/AmRadPod is where you find us Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 10:30 Eastern time. And if you listen to the podcast on iTunes and Spotify, we drop those after we get done on recording time. Guys, if you haven't already, please smash the thumbs up and follow the channel here on Rumble. It's going to be just me today. Garrett is under the weather. I guess the flu has hit the O'Boyle family household. So he is going to be laying down. Hopefully the temperatures in Wisconsin will be enough to cool the rising temperatures within the O'Boyle meter as it boils over, probably as he's listening to what we're going to be discussing today, which is disruptive forces. Some of it good, some of it not so good. We are now headlong into 3 full weeks of a Donald Trump administration at the White House, and we've seen quite a bit of progress on a bunch of fronts. We're going to talk about the plight of the federal workers, both the civilian and the military, as they are facing possibly losing their jobs. Some of it good, some of it not so good. The DOJ is finally taking some action against sanctuary states that are out there. We covered down on Illinois, but now it's been expanded out to New York. Some collusion between the media and the CIA. Michael Schellenberger has come up with the latest revelations about how bad it is, and it was worse than we prior thought. And then I think I'm going to wrap it up today with a funny story about the mafia. The actual mob in Italy is in Sicily. Sorry for those who are offended. The Sicilian mafia, Cosa Nostra. They've gone soft. They're getting a little bit too woke. So you have to stay with us for that. That'll be the final story of the day. A lot to get to. I've got a bunch of stories off to the side here, guys. We're going to have to churn and burn if we're going to get this thing done in under, 3.5 hours. Don't worry, I won't keep you that long. Grateful to have you along with us for the ride today on the American Radicals Podcast. So without further ado, let's get to the plight of the federal workers. And the first piece that I found, I thought really shined a light on just how rough they have it, comes from the Politico. The Politico says that these meetings that federal workers are having with the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, they're brief, mysterious, anxiety-provoking. Now let's get to what they're actually talking about in these meetings, because I think the American people sent a mandate in November. We've kind of gotten a nice return on investment thus far. People voted for Donald Trump to become the president. He outsourced that and made no secret about it. He outsourced some of his auditing, his desires to bring the government back into an operating efficiently, effectively, and cutting the costs, he tapped Elon Musk to go ahead and do that for him. So he's formed the Doge. Now, quote, the interviews are anxiety provoking, said a GSA supervisor whose employees were recently interviewed by a Doge worker. The tension swells the moment a worker receives the calendar invite from a Gmail account. They said, frequently with almost no notice and often scheduled over existing client meetings. So over at the Government Services Administration, the General Services Administration, they are very offended that they're going to have to interview for their jobs. And that's really what's going on here. The consultants are coming in to find out what exactly it is that you do here. And referencing a favorite of the American Radicals podcast, Office Space, because there's a lot of people who have jobs. They're gainfully employed. They just do jobs that aren't worth doing. And that's what the Doge is going to get to the bottom of. So back to Politico. Talk about a person who has a job that's not worth doing. A project manager said that they fear that based on brief interactions that they're having, that their job could be on the line. Because project managers in the federal government, because in the private sector, project managers are actually quite productive. They can drive an entire team forward to accomplish a task and do it under cost and as fast as possible. But in the government, there's really not a time constraint or a monetary constraint. So what is it, again, that you do here as a project manager in the federal government? So in the federal government, project managers act as a middleman. They get buy-in from senior leadership about tech things they might know nothing about. They said, while those in tech can directly handle the software and hardware projects. So I think they kind of give away the game here. They don't do the tech. They don't make the decisions on the tech. They're the middleman who makes the pitch. They're a salesman within their own agency to decide to opt for whatever that project manager deems to be correct, whatever the project manager needs to have happen so that the project manager can continue to have a government project to work on. And it got me thinking about back again to favorite movie reference of The Suspendables. And I think this is actually what we're seeing here from the Doge. This comes from Office Space. And if you remember when the Bobs came to visit and asked again, what is it that you do here?
What you do in Initech is you take the specifications from the customers and you bring them down to the software engineers.
Yes, that's right. Well, then I just have to ask, why couldn't the customers just take them directly to the software people, huh?
Well, I'll tell you why. Because engineers are not good at dealing with customers.
So you physically take the specs from the customer?
Well, no, my secretary does that, or they're faxed.
So then you must physically bring them to the software people.
Well, no. Yeah, I mean, sometimes.
What would you say you do here?
Well, look, I already told you. I deal with the goddamn customers so the engineers don't have to. I have people skills. I am good at dealing with people. Can't you understand that? What the hell is wrong with you people? Hey.
That was probably the way that most of the interviews have gone for the Doge. I have a job because I need a job. I'm entitled to have the job, even though I'm not providing a good or a service that the American people particularly want. I just have a job that's not worth doing. But I have people skills, gosh darn it. That's what we're seeing. We're seeing that, and we're seeing a lot of stress about the fork, which is now back on. The stay that was in place, the option to have a deferred resignation that the Trump administration offered to the entire federal workforce. You could opt in, take the fork, send the reply email to the Office of Personnel Management that I will in fact resign, and they would give you the longest possible landing strip through the end of the fiscal year. Now, there was fighting about the budget for that, but it's back on for all intents and purposes right now. And I have found out about the plight of yet another government worker who found out that there were strings attached to the fork. And I found it, I got two of these today from NPR, because, NPR, they're always reporting on the most important things like transgender issues in Ethiopia amongst marathon runners. So they jumped in on the plight of the federal worker here, as these disruptive forces have been running rampant amongst the government. And they reported on the plight of one individual who is a social worker for the Veterans Affairs. And if you're watching, you'll see this, but if you're listening, I'll have to describe this picture for this worker who, because it's NPR, they describe as a woman, Liz Goggin. Uh, that's a pretty prominent Adam's apple that Liz has there, but we'll just proceed on with the story. Federal worker tried to take Trump's fork, but found out that there were actually strings attached. Liz Goggin is among roughly 75,000 federal employees who agreed to resign, according to the Office of Personnel Management. So 75,000, that's a fair amount. I mean, there's about 2.4 million. We're looking at roughly 3 to 4% who opted in. But she is also one of an unknown number of people who have since learned they can't take the deal because their positions are exempt. As it came out, because Liz Goggin, they, them, is a social worker for Veterans Affairs. That's one of the positions that was deemed that they couldn't actually opt in. And Liz found out about that actually after replying to the email that Liz intended to resign. By the time Goggin received the fork in the road offer, Liz Goggin's household was already in upheaval because of the Trump administration's freeze on foreign aid, because the American people voted to stop sending our hard-earned tax dollars and to stop actually borrowing money on the backs of our children and grandchildren and paying exorbitant interest rates on the borrowing so that we could take that money and send it to other countries. We wanted to stop that. But now that has put Liz Goggin's husband's job in limbo. He works for an NGO. So they're both perfect. They're both Washington, D.C. people who are part of the Rainbow Kamikaze, the LGBTQAI plus _ hashtag tilde Rainbow Kamikaze at the teat of the federal government. And because Liz opted in, now Liz has a problem. Now, we go into what Liz actually does for Veterans Affairs. And from my understanding, and I am not a veteran, but VA is kind of a mixed bag in what you're going to get. It's a little bit like the box of chocolates from Forrest Gump. But this is what Goggin does. Liz Goggin came to the VA through a postgraduate fellowship where she worked with incarcerated veterans. Bet that was a unique experience. But most of Liz Goggin's current clients are, according to NPR, Black. As a white clinician, she says she relies on trainings and discussions with colleagues to work through issues and figure out how to provide the best care. She says those sessions increase her awareness, understanding of other people's experiences, including how they may be impacted by racism and other forms of oppression. I'm so glad that Liz Goggin has an experience working for Veterans Affairs for you, the American taxpayer, that has been so personally enriching to Liz Goggin to find out just how bad and evil that they, them are because of Liz Goggin's pigmentation, immutable characteristics. But we know that Liz Goggin doesn't really take immutable characteristics seriously because Liz Goggin thinks that he is pretty. Again, back to NPR. Goggin worries whether social workers at the VA will be able to abide by a code. And what is this code? The code that she's going to provide care. Given Trump's executive actions to end diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and recognize male and female as their only two sexes here. So Liz doesn't think they will be able to provide care to veterans who Liz Goggin is very concerned about because they're tan, because Liz Goggin won't be able to talk about the fact that Liz Goggin is a dude who feels pretty. Again, this is a job program. This is a job that provides no service. It's just about personal enrichment financially and a feeling of self-satisfaction as Liz Goggin gets to pontificate, wax poetically about Liz Goggins' perspectives on how you can chop off your genitals and become a member of an opposite sex, and then also be at the teat of the federal government and have a long and illustrious career contemplating how your lack of pigmentation makes you in some way evil, but it can be overcome by the fact that you just empathize so very much with incarcerated people. The Doge is going after these people. I don't care about Liz Goggins' people skills. Pretty apparent to me that Liz Goggin should probably look for employment elsewhere if Liz Goggin is actually capable of doing that. But that's really where the fear comes in for so many federal workers. They know they're overpaid, they know they're underworked, and they know their qualifications, air quote, qualifications and experiences essentially will not translate to the private sector. They'd essentially have to be starting all over again. And for a lot of these employees, they've put in a lot of time. Could be a couple of decades. And then that's a pretty scary prospect of knowing that you are not a capable person. You're not capable of adapting even to the work tempo, where you're going to have to work harder. You're going to have to work faster. Deadlines actually mean things. Another movie reference from Ghostbusters. I can't go to the private sector. They expect results. My job doesn't exist just to exist. It's not a self-licking ice cream cone. I'm supposed to be providing a good or service to a customer and actually doing a service for my employer. And if I'm able to do that, then they're going to find me, you're going to find yourself out on the unemployment line. But one of the closest things to having immortality, I guess, is a government job, until now that we have a disruptive force at the White House who's willing to bring a private sector mindset to the federal government and make it operate a little bit more effectively. Now let's talk about some other firings that are going to be happening, and again the pearl clutching that happens from the legacy left-wing communist media, how it seems to be so unprecedented, but really is it? Newsweek reporting here that Donald Trump fires Biden-appointed United States attorneys. Wow, I mean, how are we possibly going to prosecute crime now? There's no U.S. attorneys in any one of the 93 jurisdictions. Well, they have acting United States attorneys and they'll appoint replacements. And this is certainly nothing that is unprecedented as much as they want to make it the orange man bad situation. Bill Clinton actually started it. It's been routine for incoming presidents to fire the previous administration's federal prosecutors. They're known as U.S. attorneys. According to an online article on Bloomberg this past week, the Trump administration did not coordinate the firings with DOJ's executive office, and that is a standard practice. So I guess you have to actually read what went on here. Standard practice, remove the United States attorneys. But here's where you have the wrinkle. This is where the disruptive force comes in, which I think is probably a good thing. Exiting U.S. attorneys were given 2 days to explain why staff lawyers they had hired in recent years should be retained by the Trump administration. So now we're not just making a change at the top. We're looking to make changes all the way down the ladder, because there's serious and legitimate questions that have to be asked about the assistant United States attorneys that have been brought on in recent years, particularly if you applied and you saw the weaponization going on. You saw how they persecuted concentration camp survivors who prayed outside of abortion clinics. You saw how the guided tour of the United States Capitol resulted in open FBI investigations and eventual prosecutions of 2,400 people. And were you down for that fight? Did you actually take your oath of office seriously? Were you brought on specifically as it pertains to January 6th? Were you brought on specifically to prosecute those cases? That was the understanding. And maybe you were hoping to get hired on full time after it was all over, but it didn't work out. We need to know why these people got brought in. Did they come in to do the right thing at the right time, the right way, for the right reason? Were they suspendable? Or were they just looking for a job? Again, jobs programs should not be part of the federal government. Were they a person that wanted to just be a climber? They were willing to do the quid pro quo, go along with whatever the company wants in order to personally enrich themselves and ascend that ladder into a position of management. Or are they that final bucket, the person who resents having to do their job? Or are they possibly a political actor Were they coming in to actually enhance the weaponization? Those are all reasonable questions. And now you have a Trump administration, you have a Department of Government Efficiency that seems to be actually zealously pursuing what the motivations were and going to vet that out. Hopefully, get people who are problematic out and retain the people who are worth having around. But we're going to be more lean and more mean because when it comes to prosecuting cases, the federal government should put the best people out there, the most meritorious, as opposed to people who are just looking for a job. Now, pause on the Doge for a second. I want to spend a couple minutes on this revelation we've had, as long as we're talking about disruptive forces, the EPA. Lee Zeldin, who was a congressman from New York, was also a gubernatorial candidate in 2022 for New York, lost to Kathy Hochul, but he actually pretty good coattails, wind up flipping a few seats and gave the Republicans control of the House, which they, in effect, turned back over to the Democrats because they nominated and eventually made Mike Johnson Speaker of the House. And he just does whatever Hakeem Jeffries wants him to do. But not our purposes today. We're going to show the New York Post. Lee Zeldin, who is now the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, he demands a return of $20 billion. Now, this is something that was being described in the way when Lee Zeldin took over the EPA, that in anticipation of the Trump administration, the prior administration under Biden, the prior people working at the EPA were tossing gold bars off of the Titanic. And that meant, as Lee Zeldin came to learn, $20 billion appears to be money that was appropriated to the EPA, your tax dollars, under the Inflation Reduction Act, i.e. the Green New Deal. This was a couple years ago. The massive pot of money was awarded to 8 entities that were then responsible for doling it out to NGOs. So what does that mean? It means that the EPA got $20 billion and they put it in a bank and they allow 8 institutions to then take that money, not the EPA, they outsourced it to those 8 institutions to then use their best judgment and give it out to other institutions. I'm sure that they carved off a nice piece for themselves. And now we're back to the government jobs program. How many people were employed by those 8 institutions with access to $20 billion? You could aggregate every dollar that you will earn and add it to every dollar that every person within the sound of my voice earns. And you would not be able to pay the taxes on $20 billion in 100 lifetimes. $20 billion. A billion is 1,000 million. They parked that money, gave access to these 8 organizations who I'm sure were hiring a fair number of people in essentially do-nothing roles where they could have a $150,000 a year job that they could work from home, and in their spare time they could maybe go out and organize a protest for Mother Gaia. And then they, in essence, after shaving off a piece, would determine which NGOs, non-government organizations, that do the work of the government that the government wants to be done, but doesn't want the blame for because they say that they're not supposed to be doing that work, to hire other people with other do-nothing jobs for $150K, which they can probably do from home. And when they have spare time, they can go out in the streets and chant from the river to the sea. It's one giant cabal. And here from the Environmental Protection Agency, $20 billion has been discovered and clawed back. And I don't want it spent. Just refund it. We're paying more on the interest that we have in debt in this country right now than we spend on national defense. So this is all about the efficiency. This is all about how this culture of finding where not just where the inefficiency exists, but where the corruptions exist. And it's also going to be about holding certain individuals, institutions, even localities accountable. So we talked about how the Department of Justice under the new Attorney General, Pam Bondi, is now interested in holding states who claim to be sanctuary states accountable for what they're doing because they're putting the entire country at risk. This is from Eyewitness News, which is an ABC7 affiliate in New York, because now, not just Illinois, but New York has caught the attention of the Department of Justice. Pam Bondi has taken the helm there, and she's going to hold these places accountable for continuing to represent themselves to be sanctuary states and locations passing laws that are in direct opposition to the policy and the laws of the United States federal government as it pertains to illegal aliens. So here's this lawsuit. It's filed in the Northern District of New York. It targeted New York's green light law. The green light law grants driver's licenses to illegal aliens. It was passed about 5 years ago, and it stops law enforcement from asking any potential illegal alien what their immigration status is. And it bans the state DMV from sharing the personal information of the illegals who they just gave driver's licenses to. I mean, it would have been actually a pretty good con to play on illegal aliens. Say, hey, look, come in, get your free driver's license. And then once you know where they live, then ICE could go in and do the raid. But it's New York, and they're not really interested in following the law. So this is a lawsuit. It actually goes after the state of New York, the governor of New York, and the DMV authorities as well. And I want to go back to what Garrett and I discussed earlier this week. I think that there is an actual opportunity here. We're going to go after these states. If they're not going to come into compliance, maybe we should abandon them. Maybe we should say you should choke on it. You voted for it the way that Texas and Florida sent shipments of illegal aliens to Martha's Vineyard. Well, now you're going to be the sanctuary states. All the oxen free. Any of the illegal aliens that are up here, you can deal with them. We're not going to provide any federal assistance. We're not going to send federal law enforcement resources there. Will essentially cause a balkanization to happen until we reach a critical mass and your people cry out and say, follow the law. And until then, I'm here for the Attorney General going after these blue hellholes who have essentially created a dynamic in this country where illegal aliens are able to just live free and operate and continue to violate the law because apparently they're more important to the Kathy Hochul's and the J.B. Pritzkers and the Gavin Newsoms of the world. It's more important for them to have illegal aliens operating within their state's borders than their citizens living in a relatively safe country. And on the topic of illegal aliens, this is a good one, and this might actually be a opportunity. Garrett and I talked about maybe going down to Mississippi to become bounty hunters because I know that they're looking at passing laws to have bounty hunters go after illegal aliens. Well, now there's going to be an opportunity in this disruptive time with a new presidential administration for defense contractors to get in on this and this largest deportation effort nationwide in the history of the country. So NBC News reporting that DOD contractors might be assisting with deportations. The Trump administration is considering tapping into DOD funding to hire contractors. The contractors, they're not going to be bounty hunters. They're actually going to be civilian-run companies that can give temporary detention facilities. So they'd be more along the lines of jailers than bounty hunters, because there's only about 40,000 beds to hold detained illegal aliens at any one time. And this would be a way to rapidly enhance it. And ICE doesn't have the funding to really expand the number of beds. So if you were able to tap into Department of Defense resources, you might be able to very quickly expand your capabilities and the workforce that would, one, go out and assist ICE, but also be able to assist with the detainers. The ICE wouldn't have to expend the time and the resources and the personnel towards standing guard over illegal aliens when private contractors could do it, and it wouldn't even come out of the ICE coffers. It's a sort of a way to consider how defense of the nation does in fact relate to our borders. Our borders have been violated. Why? wouldn't you necessarily devote some defense resources to it? And now that you got Pete Hegseth over there and he's vocalized possibly supporting this effort, maybe pull funding, and we're not going to be sending over our defense resources to Ukraine, right? We're not going to be sending defense or resources towards training in woke ideology, which is the next piece that we should probably get to, because, and back to the plight of the federal workers, now back to the streamlining and making our military a more lethal, effective, and capable fighting force. That's directive is to go overseas against our enemies and break things, kill people and hurt feelings. And that's it, not just be a social experiment, because Donald Trump has now fired the board of visitors in every single military academy. Now, President Trump announced last week that he would be dismissing members of these boards of visitors of the 4 service academies to, quote, combat woke leftist ideologues. Joe Biden actually did the exact same thing during his administration. So any sort of argument that this is unprecedented and now our service academies are going to be flying blind is just not accurate. The move was meant to ensure that the members were aligned with the president's vision. Now, what does that vision look like? Because if you're not actually setting forth the vision and you're not actually acting on that vision, you have what happened during the first Trump administration. You have service academy cadets, graduates, actually, officers in the United States military who are infiltrators, who are communist sympathizers or actually communist members. Who remembers this guy? This guy, I think his name was Spencer, if memory serves. Spencer Rapone. Spencer Rapone. This was from the Trump administration, the first one. And for those listening, this is a photograph of a graduate of West Point, the United States Military Academy. That's the Army. And the inside of his campaign cover, he has a handwritten note that says, "Communism will win." Now, that doesn't sound like somebody who has an America first perspective. Now, let's just go back down the memory trail. And what happened to Spencer? This is a little bit dated on reporting from the AP and actually what happened to him. Because I hadn't thought about this guy until I saw the fact that we were going to be dismissing the board of visitors, which is like a board of trustees from the service academies, to get them in line with actually liking the country and not wanting to radically overthrow it and put forth a hammer and sickle type of, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs, philosophy of economics. Because I still subscribe to the land of the free. Reporting from the AP, a little bit dated, less than a year after Spencer Rapone's image drew a firestorm of vitriol and even death threats. Oh, such language. The second lieutenant became known as the commie cadet is officially, this is after we financed his education for 4 years with a degree. Now, he's put out of the military. He received a other than honorable discharge, but he was able to matriculate through West Point and actually get assigned stateside to military installations. This is someone who says they're a member of the Communist Party. And we gave them a security clearance, I'm sure, access to all the goodies that were on the Fort Drum. So he was dismissed. And because he's down for the fight, right? You could see from the fist that he gave a final picture where he was flipping the bird to Fort Drum as a salute. But, don't feel bad for old Spencer. He lost his job in the Army, but he'd found a nice place for himself to land. He's a current PhD candidate at the University of Texas. PhD candidate for the New School of Social Research. I'm sure he'll do great things within academia. They always seem to find a nice place to land, don't they? But for the time being, right now, in a disruptive time, in a time of changing things towards a more objectively good thing, now that we're reshaping our military installations, I think guys like Spencer Rapone will struggle to matriculate as long as we're able to shape the curriculum and actually produce effective and capable leaders for our armed forces, and then just vet them as they're coming through. I mean, even this guy Spencer said that he subscribed to that belief throughout his entire tenure within West Point. Nobody came forward. Nobody said, hey, that might be a problem. They might, in fact, lack loyalty. Not the Garrett O'Boyle lacked loyalty to the country, as he was alleged, because they say that he gave over, the FBI claims he handed over very sensitive information to the media, which he didn't do. And that was an indicator of lacking loyalty. Not Marcus Allen, who actually did his job, was getting open source news reporting and bringing it back to the agents working January 6 cases, saying, hey, this open source information is contradicting what we're saying. Maybe we should take that into consideration. Apparently that meant he lacked loyalty. But actual people who said that the system of government in the United States needs to be overthrown, that guy gets to graduate from one of our most esteemed military academies and then work within the armed forces until it comes to light because Colin Kaepernick took a knee and Spencer, in solidarity to virtue signal, posted a photo of himself. Now, our military is hopefully under the Trump administration, hopefully under Pete Hegseth being the Secretary of Defense, moving in a trajectory that is going to be towards defending the homeland. But we still have this conflict going on in Eastern Europe, the one that we've sent 170, 180 billion dollars towards. One we're not actually fighting in, we're reliably told. We're just sending over the JDAMs, I'm sure, with instructions, and hopefully they've been translated into Ukrainian so that they know actually how to operate them. We definitely don't have people on the ground there who are helping them fire. They're not setting them up and saying, hey, just push that button. But I want to get to the status of the Russia-Ukraine war, which is coming up on 3 years now. Man, time is flying. And this is a report, and I said, from NPR. They took a break from the trans rights in Ethiopia to report how the president is going to be meeting with Vladimir Putin, who is the more powerful of the two forces that are fighting each other. I don't think there's any mistake about Vladimir Putin having a larger military footprint than Vladimir Zelensky, despite the fact that we've tried to arm Zelensky and he's just taken that money and bought himself and his wife lots of Bugattis. But to NPR, Trump says he will meet with Vladimir Putin to start talks to end the war in Ukraine, which some estimates put around casualties in excess of 1 million people. I don't know why we wouldn't want this to stop. President Trump says he will be meeting with the Russian President Putin after holding separate phone calls with both Putin and Zelensky. Quote, we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective, unquote. And that comes from Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense. Hegseth also said that, quote, chasing this illusory goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering, unquote. It's amazing that stopping suffering is a disruption to the way that we have been doing things in this country. But that's how it's been. I mean, for the last 3 years, the Ukraine war and the Russian-Ukraine conflict, which took off just so conveniently within 1 quarter of the defense military industrial complex, losing out on Afghanistan. It's almost like there was a plan there. It's almost like we really needed to hype this up so that we can continue to just churn out all these armaments to then just buy and hand right over to our quote unquote ally in Ukraine. But now that could be coming to an end, which is an objectively good thing. And that could be a disruption to the lobbyists, to the politicians whose coffers are filled by donors from Lockheed and Raytheon. But I think for just the humanitarian side of things, that is a disruption that anyone who has a semblance of a soul could get on board with. Now, I tease this in the intro, the fact that the collusion that has been going on, and we've covered it and we've talked about it, but it's actually now come out that it's worse. The collusion between the federal government, intelligence, law enforcement, and the media. And as just a brief history, take the Russia collusion hoax as it bore out. You had an FBI that opened up this counterintelligence investigation based on fraudulent information that the Hillary Clinton campaign ginned up, handed it over to the FBI and said, why don't you open a case? Now, while they were doing this case, one of the things that they were doing to bolster their case so that they could go to the FISA court and get the wiretap was leaking the fake information they've been provided to the media. The media, in turn, would report on that information. And then the FBI would take the media reports and say, see, now we have confirmation that this is right. It was a circle, but it was represented to the courts as being a second source. Now, the information we have has been backed up. Don't pay attention to the fact that we gave that to the media, but we're not going to represent it that way. So now it looks like it's a stronger case to justify having the FISA wiretaps. Now, reporting from public about USAID and the CIA, and now we see it can get even worse than we originally thought. Both USAID and the CIA were behind the impeachment of Donald Trump in 2019. Now, this is out of the Russia collusion. The impeachment in 2019 pertained to the very fine phone call that Donald Trump had with Vladimir Zelensky, where he was asking for his help in investigating corruption that had gone on, where Hunter Biden had been going overseas, collecting bags of cash, and Joe Biden might have pressured the Ukrainian government to fire its prosecutor who was looking into the company that Hunter Biden worked for. Hunter Biden had the no-show job. Joe Biden ran cover, said, we're not going to give you $1 billion of foreign aid as long as you're investigating my son. And Donald Trump was talking to Vladimir Zelensky about that, and we had to impeach him over it. Remember, there was the quid pro quo allegations? Well, this is how bad it got. Reporting from Drop Site News last year revealed that the CIA analyst, who was Eric Ciaramella, relied on reporting by an independent investigative news organization. So Eric Ciaramella imbibed information from the news, sort of like the way the FBI imbibed information from the news to bolster its case to get a FISA wiretap. In this case, Eric Ciaramella imbibed news from the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, which appears to have effectively operated as an arm of USAID. The report alleged that there were 2 Soviet-born Florida businessmen were key hidden actors behind a plan by Donald Trump to investigate the Bidens. So basically, what it comes down to is that USAID, which has now been exposed for having provided funding to all these different media outlets, provided that funding to the media outlets, which then gave it the reporting that it needed for the CIA, Eric Ciaramella analyst, to take that reporting and then help launch an impeachment of a sitting president. Now, there's an interesting part of this where public talks about this news arm. Again, it's called the OCCRP, Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. Back to the article. Journalistic collaboration revealed that OCCRP's original funding came from the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs of the State Department. That's a carve-out from USAID. OCCRP does not operate like a normal investigative journalism organization because its goals appear to include interfering with foreign political matters. So we have this fake news organization that exists, and it's an op for the CIA to help with overthrowing regimes. And they did the exact same thing that they normally do to foreign powers, and they have bragged about doing it. And they go on further that they've done this in about 6 different countries. They ran the exact same playbook on our own country, on our own sitting president, and bolstered the CIA analysts' report with information that was not accurate because they wanted to assist in the impeachment proceedings. Very much like the way that the Russia collusion hoax worked, this was the same thing, only in addition to just the circular reporting mechanism, there were actual funding mechanism. We're not just going to give you the reporting. We're not just going to give you the leaks so that you can release a bombshell and get lots of clicks. We're going to give you the information so you can get the bombshell, get lots of clicks. Oh, and also, we're going to pay you to do it too. And the more we've been digging into this, the more the USAID has come out. And I've said it before, and it's worth saying again. When you throw a rock into a pack of dogs, the one that you hit is the one that barks, the one that yelps. And with this one, with the Doge, with the Trump administration trying to find out and root out all the corruption that's been going on for so long, they threw that rock into the pack of dogs. And the one that cried out was USAID, and they caught themselves a bleeder. Now, I don't think that we're going to get anywhere close to balancing the budget or doing anything to address the country's debt with the millions and billions that the Doge has been able to pull back. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't do that along with the other responsible things that they could possibly do. Now, as long as we're again on the topic of corrupt media, I found this one from the Free Press, and it's about PBS. It's an exclusive. PBS disappears DEI department in wake of Free Press investigation. Now, PBS was trying to do the thing that the FBI did. They were trying to move their people around who were working in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And PBS is something that you and I pay for with our tax dollars. I don't think we should. This probably should be on the chopping block. It's been a talking point for a really long time. It's not a significant amount of money that goes there in the overall scheme of things. We do spend $7 trillion a year now, but we should not be funding our own demise. We should not be under the guise of giving Big Bird money. Well, Big Bird's going out there and spouting a whole bunch of racial propaganda. So let's just get rid of PBS. But to this story about what they did with their personnel to elude the president's executive order on DEI, because DEI is supposed to be DIE. It's supposed to be dead. The Free Press received a tip from a high-ranking executive at PBS. They were first planning to shuffle its 2 DEI executives into their wellness department and then nix that idea. And instead, they wanted to station services department, which supervises communications between its national headquarters and local affiliates. PBS launched the DEI office when the network had drawn criticism because they had basically been putting too many white people on. So this was their mea culpa. They opened and they did what all the private organizations do when they want to get off the X and have the spotlight of the Al Sharptons of the world. They say, "Oh, you know what? We're going to donate to your Rainbow Project over there. Oh, you know what? We're going to take the white people off the air. We're going to have our own new DEI branch." Well, they tried to hide these people. They got busted doing it, and now they try to defend it by saying that only 15% of their budget was related to taxpayer subsidies, and that you shouldn't really be concerned with what goes on. But 15% would be $1.40 per person in the country. Are you getting your money's worth? How much Big Bird do you really watch? Do you know anyone who watches Sesame Street? So $1.40 per American. That needs to go away. If PBS can stand on its own, it should stand on its own. I think we know that it can't. Now, as long as we're talking about disruptive forces, it's not all good. So it's gone the other way. There's definitely been some roadblocks, particularly abusing the court systems, getting these activist judges. So reporting from Tyler Durden over at Zero Hedge about some of the latest efforts to throw up the roadblocks, to be disruptive forces of their own, to stop these good things that are actually happening. 14 states are now suing to block the Department of Government Efficiency from uncovering government abuses. So you have 14 states that want the government to continue to waste money and abuse the citizens. So how are they doing it? What are their grounds for doing this? They're suing Elon Musk and Donald Trump, alleging that the authority that he granted to Musk and his team is unconstitutional. The states include Arizona, Michigan, and Rhode Island. They've taken aim at efforts to dramatically reduce the size of the federal workforce, including dismantling entire agencies. They're saying that you can't do that. This is an unconstitutional move to essentially empower Elon Musk's operation. You can't outsource it. That is against the law. The lawsuit argues that Trump violated the appointments clause of the Constitution by creating Doge. But Doge isn't actually an official government agency. The point of the lawsuit is they're saying that it actually is an official government agency and that he would need congressional approval in order to do that. The lawsuit also says that Elon Musk was granted sweeping power without the advice and consent of the Senate. But here's the hiccup. The president's allowed to appoint advisors. So I think it's a pretty firm case that you can say that Elon Musk is just advising me. He's doing it for free or $1 a year, however we need to do it. And that seeking to block Elon Musk from making changes to government funding and canceling contracts and making personnel decisions is just not going to hold water. Now, they probably have venue shopped. They probably have found a judge that will sign on to it. It's going to ultimately come down to a matter of will from Donald Trump and from everybody around that administration to say, you have your decision. That's great. Now let's see you enforce it. We are canceling everyone's emails who we've fired. We are turning off their access cards to the building, and the direct deposits are going to cease. We fix the glitch that way, Office Space style. Now I want to transition. I got a couple ones left, guys, and these are two health ones because I think they are worth getting into as long as we're talking about being disruptive or disruptive to the general understanding. And it's not going to be disruptive to this audience, this first one that comes from Slay, because it's about the coronavirus vaccines. But this is certainly going to be disruptive to a lot of people who actually bought into the notion that shooting an experimental gene juice into your arm was safe and effective. And if you didn't, then grandma would die. So reporting over from Slay says that 2.3 million people were part of a study. They studied the coronavirus vaccine, and they determined that it actually is destroying immune systems of people, actually making you more vulnerable to more diseases. Major new study involved 2.3 million patients. It confirmed that the mRNA vaccines destroy human immune system by attacking thyroids. There were 2,333,496 patients. So we'll say that's an adequate sample size. Half the group was vaccinated and the other half was unvaccinated. The study found that the vaccines influence the incidence of thyroid dysfunction. So that could cause hypo or hyperthyroidism. Hypothyroidism means it's not acting as quickly as it should, and it leads to being tired, gaining weight, feeling depressed, and some risk to your heart. Hyperthyroidism means it's working too fast, and that can actually lead to weight loss and muscle weakness and heart palpitations, anxiety, osteoporosis, and you can have some other life-threatening risks. So again, it always seems to go back to COVID, doesn't it, on the American Radicals podcast? Something that we held the line on. It just didn't pass muster. And now we're finally here to see it. And unfortunately, if the numbers are correct, a majority of human beings on this planet plunge that needle into their arm, and there's going to be health consequences for it. And it is going to be a disruption to health services. I think that there's going to be loath to attribute any sort of maladies that are likely tied to the mRNA vaccines to the mRNA vaccines. They'll say, oh, died suddenly is just it's going around. You should probably wear a mask. The died suddenly season, it's upon us. Probably wear 2 masks. Now, the other health one that I did find, and because it's been sort of taking the landscape by storm, discussions about this drug, this weight loss miracle drug, Ozempic. And I'm a firm believer in just put in the miles, guys. Get up earlier and go for a run, go exercise and feel better. You don't need to outsource that to a drug, but other people have made a different calculation. They want to pop the pill, and they think that that's going to be the way or part of their strategy for a healthier life. This reporting from Daily Mail that could be a possible mistake. More Americans on Ozempic are going blind as doctors are sounding the alarm over the potentially startling side effect which exists with this weight loss drug, which is being billed as a miracle, but could be anything but. Several studies have linked the Ozempic shots to conditions that cause inflammation and block blood flow to your eyeballs. It causes severe and sometimes permanent vision loss. The experts that were part of this study said that while the exact cause is unclear, Ozempic can rapidly lower your blood sugar level and can cause damage to blood vessels in your eyes, and it can lead to vision loss. So that's just something else that should be in the back of your mind when you're assessing whether or not you want to just do it the old-fashioned way. We are in February. I know we're past the quitter's day in January when the New Year's resolutions all go bye-bye. But today could be the first day of the rest of your life. You only have to stop. You only have to not quit exercising once. And then you're good, right? All right, I got one more. And this is the one I teased at the beginning. And again, comes to the Daily Mail because we have had a disruption to our way of looking at masculinity right now. I mean, you look around, I feel bad for you young ladies. I really do, especially in this time of year. We've just come across Valentine's Day, and there are a lot of soy boys out there. And the soy boys have even infiltrated into the bad boys. Let's talk about the mafia, which has gone soft because they have gone woke, guys. Reporting from the Daily Mail. Mafia godfathers mock miserable caliber of notorious gangs' new recruits after dozens were arrested and became state's witnesses. Can you believe it? The mafia creed that you don't turn rat is no longer in effect because they're weak. Mafia bosses in Sicily have been heard complaining about their lack of power and the miserable state of new recruits in intercepted conversations. So they've got wiretaps on the mob bosses. Wiretaps caught the godfathers of Cosa Nostra moaning that the younger criminals are too quick to agree to turn and become state's witnesses when arrested. Now, they did just have a massive takedown. I think they got a close to 200 Cosa Nostra affiliated people in Sicily. So it was a big, huge hit to their operation as it goes on. But there's a nostalgia factor here. I mean, who doesn't enjoy? What man doesn't enjoy watching a nice, a few minutes at least on TM's Turner Classic of The Godfather? And now we're not even going to have that anymore. They're going weak. I guess we're going to have to look for our heroes to be elsewhere. Maybe people who don't cut off horses' heads to just send a message to failing actors that they better follow through on their promises. Making a deal you can't refuse. Do better, Cosa Nostra, because we need to have a worthy opponent to a worthy law enforcement apparatus. I want to make at least work for it. I'm a federal worker if I'm an FBI agent who actually wants to work for my job. I don't want it to be too easy, right? Well, I guess we'll have to have a better brand of criminal. Maybe the Joker will come to town. All right. So I do have a palate cleanse. Garrett's not here for the Jesus juke today. And, I don't have it in me. It's just that's not the real Steve Friend way to go. So I could give it the old college try. I mean, the one thing that's been on my mind lately is the book of Exodus, because of our less than triumphant exit from the FBI and the fact that you now have an incoming new director in Kash Patel who will be voted on in this upcoming week here, and the fact that you read through that and you see how the Jews, as they were liberated from Egypt and they witnessed miracles happening before them, a pillar of fire leading them across the Red Sea and vanquishing their enemies. And then a couple weeks later, sitting around saying, we're going to starve to death. After witnessing those miracles, and you read it and you think, man, how did you witness that and then have a crisis of faith? Well, I think things tend to repeat themselves. If they don't repeat, they certainly rhyme. And I know for Garrett, for myself, and for the other guys, there have definitely been some times in the last 2.5 years where we have taken a moment and thought, I don't understand why this is happening. And then you have to say, I'm repeating the exact same mistakes. There's no question that there were miracles involved with our exits and with the fact that our paths have crossed, and the fact that we're able to now communicate with so many people like this audience, the American Radicals podcast. So in any moment of weakness, I know today that I will just take some solace and then take a moment and realize that it's all part of a greater plan. So not up to the GOB actual standards. Did my best, guys. Hope it was meaningful for you. But I do want to leave you with a nice palate cleanse because we're coming off of the Valentine's Day weekend and romance in 2025. I love to say that I feel like I was on the last helicopter out of Nam because I avoided the internet dating. But that doesn't mean that it couldn't have been upfront. I do admire this. And this is what dating in 2025 looks like.
Melanie, I'm single, you're single. What do you say we get married?
Well, I'm glad you finally decided on the direct approach.
Yeah, well, I'm a businessman at heart.
As am I. What's your offer?
Single rich male seeks matrimony.
Primary residence?
Westchester County.
Would you be open to considering a secondary residence in Manhattan?
Central Park West.
South.
Done. Time spent together.
8 hours, 5 days a week.
7 hours, 12 hours weekends.
55 hours aggregate, specifics to be determined later.
I'm amenable to that. Children.
1.
3.
2.
Done. But one of them has to be a male.
I'll see what I can do. Vacations.
December, Hawaii.
June, the vineyard.
June, fine, but Hawaii.
Nope, the vineyard.
Is that a deal breaker for you?
I'm afraid so.
Me too. Well, we gave it a shot.
I'm sure you'll find a better match.
Thanks for the time.
Oh, romance. It's just very complicated. All right, guys. Thank you very much today. I did my best to try to churn and burn through as much as I could. Hope it was satisfying for you all. We'll be back. Hopefully, Garrett will be back next week, Tuesday, 10:30 Eastern time. Until then, guys, have a great, safe, and blessed weekend.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.